Welcome to Mindshifters Radio. Today is Monday, May the 12th. And today we are on a new version of the app, and I think we've got our problem solved. So let's just check in. Miss Jeanie is on the other line. So I'm going to check in and invite Jeanie to come say hello. And I've got a spinning top here for a second, Jeanie. Are you with us, Jeanie? Okay, well, still not hearing you. Okay, we're running a little test here, folks, so let's just stay with us if you would. Try hitting the call in button again if you would, Jeanie. Excuse us, we're doing a test here. In the meantime, we'll just say, well, we're seeing if Jeanie's going to make it. We'll check in. Cami, glad you're here. Okay. We'll try Jeanie one more time. We should have the ability to interact now. We've got a new version of the app installed on our phones. And so, Miss Jeanie, can you hear me? No, still nothing. Okay. Well, maybe, all right. Unfortunately, we are not there yet. Okay, looks like we've still got a challenge with the call-in function. So we'll just go on with our monologue format. We've been doing that for the last week or so, and we'll just keep working in that direction and say, delighted that you're here, delighted that you're sharing your insights. I had a question from a longtime participant in this work, someone who's listening to the radio show, and there was a request for uh, a an assessment of the Greek translation, what people call the Greek translations of the work of Yeshua. And it actually opened a whole area in my mind, which is one of the reasons why I appreciate the questions, because it is difficult for any one person on their own. It takes a community. If you remember, in the Aramaic language, the words kingdom of heaven are properly translated as the community of love. It takes a community of love to really open the space for this healing process to occur. And so each of your questions, and hopefully I'll be able to look at comments. If you have any comments for us, put them in the comment section. If you have any questions, we'll be checking comments to see what's happening. But this question was, what do I do with everything that I've learned from the Greeks? And one of my doctorates is in the arena of holistic medicine. The other is in holistic philosophy. How does the whole game, how does the whole of the world work together? Is a real key to stepping back to the truth of who we are. We each came into the world filled with breath. We each came into the world, and as I think about that, as I say that, I was saying to Jeanie this morning how much trauma my parents must have gone through. We've got our grandson today, and he's got a bit of a cough, and it's like, oh, what's happening? And I think back to the fact that when I was still in utero, my mother had toxemia. The last 6 days I was in utero, they gave her Pitocin to try to force me out. The night of my birth, they contacted my father at work and said, you better get down here if you want to see this kid alive because he's not going to make it through the night. And 3 or 4 times in my early life, I was almost dead. I lived on drugs. And when I got to school, the first 2 weeks of school, that was asthma season. And so rarely was I ever in school the first 2 weeks. I was in an oxygen tent in the hospital. So maybe that's one of the reasons why the breath, as I have this thought, we're all filled with breath. And the truth was, I wasn't. But that might be one of the reasons why the breath has become such a profound key for me. And what my experience is once we fall from living in awareness of who we are as human beings, of who we are as love, and we fall into a lower order of awareness that comes from the mind, then we've fallen into brokenness. And this question was about the veracity of Greek interpretations of the teachings of Yeshua. And certainly in the Greek interpretations, for most, there is a deeply guilt-inducing but feel-good dogma. Get tingles, praise, all of that, while the guilt sits side by side. That's called brokenness would be my offering. That was my insight from his question. And I realized that it's time for us to make an uncompromising shift away from the interpretations that the Greeks gave us. Because what I realized, I was speaking to the gentleman this morning who asked the question, what I realized was the Greeks are trying to work back to wholeness from brokenness, from that state of brokenness. And we've got all these wonderful Greek philosophies and Greek accomplishments and Greek art and Greek music and Greek plays and Greek tragedies. But what I realize is that the Greek mind in the Greek language is in the same set as John the Baptist was, that of brokenness. Now remember, John the Baptist was considered to be, what they called him was, one, the raving maniac in the desert. Like, why would you call somebody that? Well, if you don't understand the Aramaic nuances, that sounds like quite an insult, really. But once you understand the Aramaic, the desert is a code word for the unconscious. And each of us who has fallen from grace, fallen from that state of being that we were originally created as, into brokenness, is going to have to meet someone, John the Baptist, the raving maniac in the desert, the person who can reach into our unconscious and show us everything we haven't dealt with so that we can start to work through that brokenness, start to forgive that brokenness. Well, my take is the Greeks thought that, well, you're a sinner, you're going to hell, accept that, we'll fix you. And so you can be guilty and make sure you keep that guilt going. And by the way, the root of the guilt is fear. And remember, the beginning of wisdom is fear of God. In the name of a book that said over 300 times, fear not. This is the mind of brokenness trying to comprehend wholeness. So there's this doctrine of guilt, but then there's the doctrine of salvation, which is feel good. And those two are always competing in the mind of brokenness. When you go to the Aramaic, what you have is a teaching based from and in the direct experience of wholeness. You can't go from brokenness back to wholeness. You've heard me speak of the physicist David Bohm. And as a physicist, he had this idea that he came up with, that we had to reach a state of regulatory speech isn't very good, but unbroken wholeness, reaching back to standing in a space of being with our human lives at the forefront, the wholeness at the forefront, not the guilt, not the salvation, the wholeness has to be at the forefront. That's what Yeshua delivered, was wholeness. And then those with broken minds tried to interpret it, and now you have Greek interpretations. There are no Greek translations of Yeshua's teachings. There are no translations, would be my offer. There are interpretations, but they're so far removed from Yeshua's actual teachings as to you could actually call them satanic. Now, remember, we're not going to use the Greek idea of Satan. That's the dude with the red suit, the tail, and the pitchfork that's out to get you. And like he's one of the head dudes that you get to join the one world universal religion of blame by blaming him. The devil made me do it. But that's nothing to do with Aramaic teachings. In the Aramaic language, the word Satan means the resistor, one who misleads. You tell the average person that they're responsible for their brokenness, and they'll go into holding their breath into resistance and tell you the story about how somebody else is the problem. Oh, it was my mother, it was my father, it was my spouse, it was my kids, it was the government, it was the world, it's always somebody else. That's satanic. Resistance and the story about how it's somebody else. So again, in Aramaic, Satan means the resistor, one who misleads. So in the original Aramaic sense of the word, the whole Greek interpretation that's put into Yeshua's mouth is out of resistance and being misled. So the reliability of Greek dogma and doctrine is zero, I would offer. And actually perhaps we could say less than zero, because there's this other thing the Greeks became really good at. And that was, if you're not familiar with it, you might want to do some research and reading about it. Sophia, they say, is wisdom, but actually the sophist was someone in the political world who traveled the country of Greece, teaching the children of the wealthy how to lie and make their lies sound true. So sophistry is the Greek study of the skill of making the lie appear true. So when you get all that and it's reinforced, remember from the word go, fear not, fear not, fear not, fear not, but fear is the beginning of wisdom, say the Greeks. This is the study of making the false appear true. So my offering is the reliability of that material is less than zero. So listening to the Greek mind of man, you remember in the scriptures they talk about the mind of man. There's that passage where Yeshua comes out of the Garden of Gethsemane. He has just had his full-blown experience of wholeness. His body has sweat and blood, the detox, the release was so deep. And you remember he confronts Paul, who's taken the sword and he's trying to kill the high priest's servant. And he says to Paul, "Get thee behind me, Satan." And then he defines what he means by Satan. And this gets ignored in the whole Greek game. He says, "For you think in the mind of man rather than the plan of God." Now, he's talking to Paul, who's speaking Aramaic like he is, and he's talking about the Aramaic mind of man stuck in such lies that it can't be heard. So he's saying to Peter, "Get behind me, get out of the way, you who are stuck in the mind of man." Now, today, what people are listening to in the most part of the dogma and the doctrines of Greek philosophy put into the mouth of Yeshua. So now we're even a huge generation away from the Aramaic mind of man into the Greek mind of man. If the Aramaic back then was so degraded that Yeshua called Peter Satan, how degraded is it to be in a whole language and a whole culture and a whole brokenness away from the Aramaic possibilities? So in terms of accepting, buying into the Greek dogma, the Greek doctrine, a metaphor would be like sending of a child of 4 into the physics lab and then expecting that child of 4 to write a graduate paper on the potential of a particle accelerator in predicting the nature and behavior of black holes. That's what you're asking the Greek mind to do. You're asking a 4-year-old to go into the lab, study physics, and understand enough to write about how the particle accelerator is going to predict the nature and behavior of black holes. That's what we're asking it to do. And you can't work backwards from brokenness to wholeness. You can't do it. That's the realization I got from this question today. That's why David Bohm, as a physicist, was talking about unbroken wholeness. Now, the regulatory speech is not so great. You know, properly, it would be wholeness. Where do you get to that experience? That's Ruka de Kudja in Aramaic. That's the breath. You know, in Aramaic, when they talked about, when the Greeks mistranslated or misinterpreted the breath as the Holy Spirit, something about some kind of disembodied spirit being or something. If you go back into the Aramaic writings in the creation story, it doesn't say the Creator sent out his spirit, it says the Creator sent out his breath. And when we allow this wholeness to enter fully, and we can get the broken mind to shut up, we can get the broken mind to quit for 1 minute. It's the broken mind that holds this whole separation and brokenness in place. You've got to get it to quit, even if it's just for an instant. And I feel so abundantly blessed that I found the first century Aramaic language and came to understand what forgiveness meant in Aramaic, which is a way to get miniature experiences of wholeness. Because each time you cancel the goal and collapse a perceptual construct based in pain, fear, hostility, rage, guilt, grief, trauma, and trauma, each time you collapse that, there's a little space in there where one gets to taste their human lives. That's where the transformation takes place. You know, in 40 plus years of doing worksheets with people, when people get down to the step where they review what the situation's about. Remember, in step 1 in the worksheet, you've described I, Michael, who am love, and feeling sadness or grief or rage or whatever it is, and my thought is, and the situation is. So that's all described. And then down in step 6, remember, how does number 1 look to you now? The most common comment, and I'm talking about things where, like, on a scale of 1 to 10 people, we're at a level 1,000 upset. And they did one worksheet. And after the worksheet, they're like, and this is the most common comment I've gotten over the years from people doing worksheets. It's like, you know, I don't even know why I was upset about that. It's like, it's no biggie. Why? Because there was a taste of being, and being brings in the new, brings in the wholeness. Quantum still point breaks the mind for long enough, gets the mind to shut up long enough for the taste of wholeness to enter physiology and build from there. And the breath delivers the active presence of love to every cell in the structure and returns us to that state of wholeness. Of course, the mind wants to come back with its old trash and grab us and take us back once again to the old way. But there comes a point where, over time, the mind of brokenness, the mind of hostility, fear, sadness, loss, grief, pain, and trauma weakens as you do your work. And the connectedness and the voice of wholeness gets stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's ultimately the objective of this work. So I have an appreciation for the question that was asked. And again, if you are in the queue and you have a question or a thought, hit the comment button and we'll So Miss Jeanie is on the line again. We got an instruction from my MBA to try something else. Let's just see. Okay, Miss Jeanie, you're live with us on the show as we speak. Say again? No, I don't have my headset on. I took it off. We're doing a test here. Excuse us for interrupting. So we've got you, Jeanie, but you're not there. Okay. All right. Well, we've still got challenges, but we're working through them step by step. All things moving forward. So your birthright by offering. Is it your birthright? We kind of closed the show out on Friday with this idea. Is to experience yourself as the presence of conscious active love, to experience wholeness, which is your true nature. And you're not designed just to experience that, but you're designed to experience the true nature of everyone around you. And my take would be that each of us carries a different quality of being, a different quality of energy in our true nature. And our basic right as humans is to experience that true nature of ourselves right from the beginning, of our parents, and of everyone around us. If you have a codependent relationship with yourself, you relate to yourself through that false image of yourself. And all of this needs to come up for exposure to be healed. Now, we have this faculty in the mind that I'm going to call the reality formation system. That's where your behavior comes from. You'll notice that you've probably said, as I've said, and most everybody I know has said at some point, there's a behavior that I did. I did not like the fact that I did that. It's like, whoa, how could I have ever done that? And I say to myself, and I'm never going to do that again. And you meant it, right? I did. What happened, however, the next time the stress was up and the chips were down? You did it again. Why? Because as long as the thought disorders that go into the function of the reality formation system, where behavior driving realities come from, as long as those thought disorders are present, then they're going to generate, based on that content, every reality that's stored in the mind. And if the reality that's stored in the mind, if what the generational pattern is and what the power person dynamic was, if I do this, then I get to be safe or I get to survive or what have you, then that's the behavior one is going to do. And remember that when ultra stressed, go back, we're now in about the third week of talking about the power person dynamic and the codependence work. What, when ultra stressed, does everybody on the planet do? Unless they've confronted and healed this power person dynamic. Now, I'll offer that. I've searched far and wide around the planet, and there's nowhere that this power person dynamic is available aside from this work that I know of. I've never seen anything that resembles it. They'll talk about the importance of your parents and all of that, but the specific behaviors tied to the behaviors that the reality formation system feed to you under stress, or when, remember, there are only three behaviors possible. When there's little or no stress, you'll do whatever you did to get along with your power person. We'll call that persona one. Remember that in Aramaic, or in the Greek language, that's where the persona comes from. The word persona means mask. Personality is a mask. And we are all personalities. All of us have at least three different personalities. And the three different personalities relate to the level of stress we're under and the behaviors in the reality formation system based in the power person dynamic. And until this is cleaned out, it's going to run the show. How many times have you said, I'm never going to do it again? But when the stress was up and the chips are down, there you were, back doing it again. Because the underlying thought disorders, the generational patterns, were still within the structure and had not yet been forgiven. So remember, what are the behaviors? When there's little or no stress, persona 1, people will do whatever they did to get along with their power person. Behavior 2, when stress starts to build, people will do whatever they did to resist and survive with their power person. That's personality number 3 or 2. Personality number 3, when ultra stressed, people do whatever their power person did to them that they hated the most. So maybe in one's normal persona, they're Mr. or Ms. Nice Guy. That's what I like to use as an example. Stress starts to build. They become Mr. or Ms. Snarky. You've been married to this person for 5 years and they've been wonderful and sweet. Their persona is Mr. or Ms. Nice Guy. And then one day the stress was up and the chips are down, and all of a sudden they became so snarky. You look at them and went, who are you? What happened? I don't even know you. Ever had that happen in a relationship? That's level 2. That's persona. That's match 2 based in the power person dynamic. And then the third level, when one becomes ultra stressed, they will do what their power person did to them that they hated the most. If you watch someone who's ultra stressed and the behaviors that they do, you know exactly what their power person did to them. Now, if you've cleaned up your mind and somebody's in crazy time because of what their power person did, because of that energy being taken on, if you cleaned up your mind sufficiently, you're going to stand as a space of compassion for that. Of course, you have the choice to be able to say, I'm in or out at any time you choose to. But ultra stressed, the reality formation system forces us to do. Now, some people have enough discipline to hold back. I remember back several years ago, we were in Fort Lauderdale doing a series of workshops, and was a gentleman who showed up who was into the AA movement. He had a large online AA presence and a group that he worked with in Fort Lauderdale. He'd been an alcoholic and sober for about 30 years. And he invited us to come and present the codependence workshop. And when I explained these 3 behaviors, he came back at me like he was really happy we were there. But at that point, he came back a little bit in his Mr. Snarky with, well, that's not true, because when I was a kid, I had a father who literally mercilessly beat me every day of my life. He said, and I have never touched my son. So that's just not true. And at that point, I said, okay, I got it. So you had enough discipline not to do what your power person did to you. I congratulate you for that. But how much time do you still spend controlling your fists? And it was like he could have fallen over because he was still fighting the urge to hit people, exactly what his power person done to him. Until the energetic patterns stored in carbon-based memory, the mind of man, are removed, then those dynamics are going to continuously generate realities based in the power person. And when those things are generated, it becomes a block to allowing the actuality of the being that you are, the bliss, the joy, the heaven within, to come into expression. This wasn't a religious journey. This is just where we're designed to live. It's got nothing to do with what you believe or what you don't believe. A change in the place from living in the non-being mind, in the codependent dynamic, in the power person dynamic, a change from that place into living in being is called rebirth or conversion. We're here to convert you. You started out in a love-based mind, every one of you, every one of us. And we were converted into hostility and fear-based mind. We're not interested in converting you to anybody's religion. We are interested in giving you the opportunity to be converted back to a love-based mind, to get back to the truth of who you are, and train your reality generation system to be fueled by and function from, literally, the active presence of love. Where do you want to live? Do you want to live in the power person dynamic, in the hostility and fear-based world, or in the mind of love? It takes work to do this. We were each created for relationship with love. Now, if you look back at the worksheet we did when we started this codependence to independence worksheet or workshop, if you look back, remember you had a list of everybody who's ever offended you, the nature of their offense, your advice to them, how you're going to follow your advice to them. Now, here's when you'll know that codependence is over in any of those relationships. And that is that you look at that list and you willingly scratch their name out. And as you scratch their name out, you put your name in. That's when you've moved out of codependency, and now you get to move into the interdependent state. To support you in doing. That's what we're here to support you in arriving. So I'm just looking, we've got a note from Ayende. If nothing tragic happens in your childhood, then who becomes your power person? In other words, who were they? Who are we without trauma or stress? Well, first of all, I've never met anybody. And it doesn't necessarily mean something tragic occurred. Basically, most of us have generational patterns of unresolved hostility and fear. So there may have been nothing overly traumatic that happened in, say, for instance, one's childhood. And that would be the person who, from day one, the conversation we're having here, that would the parents would have been able to have this type of conversation. The parents were about doing their work and opening the space to stay free from buying into this power person dynamic. Pretty rare. I can say I've never met anybody. I've had people who were brought up in family systems that were about doing their work. And still, when the stress was up and the chips are down, I observed that power person dynamic still happening. So I guess a way to tell whether that impacts any given individual or not, it would be up to that individual to honestly assess themselves. If I'm rolling along in my life, let's say I'm in relationship and I'm in love, I have this person who resonates enough love in me that I'm connected to the truth of who I am. When the stress is up and the chips are down, do I stay connected to who I am? And if I do, then I've got the relationship that is literally the relationship that is a manifestation of what would be called heaven. The word heaven in Aramaic, nothing to do with the place off in the sky, but rather the word in Aramaic speaks of, literally, it would be translated as the community of love. So I now have a family system of the community of love. If when the stress is up and the chips are down, however, I or my partner go into some behavior other than love, then that's the time to pick up the tools and do the work. So that would be my input on that question. I hope that fits and makes sense. And let's see, comments. Does that fit for you? Does that resonate anything else? And if so, put it in the comments there. And I'm going to keep the comments open so I can read them and see what we've got. And the objective is, with forgiveness, whenever the mind serves up some form of hostility or fear, that I recognize that this hostility or fear that I'm feeling is something inside of me, and that if I at that moment apply forgiveness, then I will collapse the conscious picture that I have. The unconscious conscious is kind of like an iceberg. 85% of it is under the surface. Actually, laboratory stats, they did some research back in the 50s, and these stats have never been, disproven. But in the time frame where they've got somebody hooked up to a measure 10,000 brain cells firing, in that time frame, the maximum amount of data that goes into conscious awareness is 9 bits. And so we get to see this little tiny piece. If when the stress is up and the chips are down, that little tiny piece is not based in love, then if I know how to collapse that little tiny piece based in hostility or fear, when I apply forgiveness, that part of my mind is going to collapse in on itself. And when it collapses in on itself, I have the opportunity now to see what underlies it, which is the thing that people who live in denial never get to see. As long as I'm in denial, and our definition in this work of denial is whenever I think or speak as though something outside of me is the cause of what's moving inside of me, then by being in denial, you made me mad. What I've in essence said to my mind is, I do not want to own this mad part of my mind. So, mind, hide this, put this away, never show it to me. That's called dissociation. So, I've dissociated from the truth of what my anger is about. And then the second part is, of course, I speak the words of, see what he did, see what she did that made me so mad. So now I've given my mind instructions to bring evidence forward that proves my thesis that they're the reason why I'm in this state. And you watch most people in relationship, and you have two people each pointing the finger at the other. And we have a whole workshop about that. It's called communication. Did you hear what I think I said? Most people in this world start out their lives, and very early, like by about the age of 4, they are very committed, indoctrinated, devout members of the one world universal religion of blame, guilt, fault, and shame. And they've got a whole conversation about how, well, this only happened because of what they did. Liar, liar, pants on fire. I'm hiding from myself. And, the unconscious dynamic is what I need to get in touch with. And I love how clearly Carl Jung brought that one forward. He says, until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. We'll say, well, that's just life doing it to me again. As opposed to, how do I, and unfortunately, Carl Jung did not have, as far as I can tell, an understanding of forgiveness. There is no place on the planet that you will find it other than in the first century Aramaic language of Yeshua, in the Course in Miracles. They're the only two places. And to me, that's enough verification that those two came from the same source, and that forgiveness is understanding how the truth about how the mind works when my mind generates a construct based in hostility or fear. If I can locate precisely the goal that's resonating, and this is a piece of information that literally took me 35 years to understand. Like, I was introduced to this idea of canceling goals very early in working with the Aramaic. And over the years, I've had so many people say, well, why, I've got this wonderful goal. I just want this person to accept me and cherish me and honor me. Why would I cancel that? That really sounds stupid. It's like, yeah, it does really sound stupid. But notice that as long as you're holding that goal, that resonates hostility and fear when they don't fulfill it. And the hostility and fear, yes, I understand, because the mind is an evidential device and your instructions to the mind are, show me that they're the problem. How do you do that? How do you instruct your mind to show you that somebody else is the problem? You say, they made me mad. Now I've said to my mind, my mad, you've hidden from me, thank you. Now I want you to use that energy to build my brain's image of them. And then literally the mind converts thoughts to pictures, and I'll get a picture of it being about them. And that's driven by a goal. Why should I cancel a perfectly good goal to be cherished and honored by someone? Because as long as you're holding that goal, what you're telling me when you're not cherished and honored by someone is in the file in your mind, so to speak, on being cherished and honored, there is some form of hostility or fear that you've yet to resolve. Maybe it happened to you earlier in your life. Maybe it happened 10 generations ago in your bloodline. It doesn't matter. The mind, when it goes into activity, includes everything in your genetic history. So the genius of this man Yeshua 2,000 years ago, I wish I'd figured this one out. My mind didn't come close. I just happened to be introduced. And I asked myself the same question, why would I cancel this perfectly good goal? Because when I load this goal in my mind and people don't follow it, don't follow my demand, I go into hostility and fear and build a picture of them as the problem. Now I've got the evidence that they're the problem. Of course, at some point, I've got to question myself and say, I've been through this particular anger outburst 87 different times with 42 different people. I wonder if maybe it's got to do with me instead of them. Well, how do I access it? Here's how you do it. You have this perfectly wonderful goal, and you're in hostility or fear because somebody isn't fulfilling it. You need to get underneath that projection, that picture in your mind, and get to the unconscious dynamic where the hostility and fear is. Well, Michael, how do I do that? I cancel the goal. When I can, when you're looking at this 10,000 brain cells firing, and the mind is using 9 bits of data to build our perceptual reality, obviously something determines which 9 bits of data you're going to use. If you load a goal for them to be caring and honor you, then you go into hostility and fear when they violate that goal. You know that in the file, so to speak, in your mind on being cared and honored, there's some form of unresolved hostility or fear. You cancel the goal, and the surface mind's projection, the picture of them, collapses in on itself. It's driven by that goal. And when it drops down, when it collapses in on itself, I now have access to my own unconscious dynamic. I have access. Now the unconscious becomes conscious. And that's when I'll say, geez, I don't even know why I was upset about that. Because once the energy of upset's gone from it, once it's been exposed to love and dissolve, you're free of it. And that is forgiveness. It's got nothing to do with the Greek idea of I'm going to let you off the hook for what's happening inside of me. So I hope that makes sense. On my part, to get to grasping that particular piece of information. So when again, go back to the worksheet we started out with. When you're willing to, everybody was on that first list. Everybody who's ever offended you. When you're willing to cancel or scratch their name out and put yours in, you've moved out of codependency. And then when you are committed, you'll use, part of there's a self-study. If somebody wants to take this to the whole next level, there's a self-study intensive that includes 89 hours of teaching and processing and question and answer work. It's a self-study, includes personal code evaluation, pre and post, so you know where your blocks are, and specific tools for how to work through them. And so that intensive is called Codependence to Interdependence Communication Practicum. Most of the world is stuck in what we call projection communication. You made me sad. You hurt me. You make me feel good. You make me happy. When you smile at me, you make me love you. That's all projection language. Responsibility language is quite different. Responsibility looks like, I noticed, and you and I have been through this a dozen times. You say a certain thing in a certain way. It's like you twist your lip somehow. I don't even know exactly what it is, but something happens, and I go into a rage. Now, I used to think my rage was caused by the way you twisted your lip and the way you said things, but now I'm starting to wake up and go, I've been through this rage 87 different times with you. And I'm realizing it's not about you. It's projection language for me to describe it as you enrage me. But now I'm going to go into responsibility language. What's that look like? Well, when you say that thing that you say and you twist your lip that way, that really resonates some deep rage in me. And I realize I've got a problem. And what I'm looking for is support in solving my problem. Actually, I could refine that language a little bit because most people are addicted to problem solving, and you're the problem. If they could just solve you, everything would be fine. But rather, that the objective in the responsibility communication is always looking for support in healing whatever's going on. So that would look like, so when you twist your lip that way, it's just something that I notice that, and the tone of your voice, and man, rage comes up in me, and I realize that I need to deal with this rage. Would you help? Do you have any ideas? Do you have any suggestions? So this is not a request for someone else to change. Now there is, and we get into this in that particular part of the workshop, the responsibility communication workshop. Most people just want to solve the problem. That means change you. What this work is about is not about changing anybody else. It's about healing yourself. And whatever it is, the trauma that needs to be dealt with, whatever's going on in the inside, you survived whatever that was, and you will be victorious over it as you process it out. Now, if we touch into those things, there'll always be someone around who'll play out enough of the role to make it look like I can blame that. And this goes into this is everything. This is accidents, bacteria, viruses. Well, Michael, it was really an accident. They just happened to be in the road when the truck came by. Well, here's my offering. If you were standing in the road and the energy of a truck was coming down the road, if you weren't preoccupied with something that blocked your awareness, you'd have been warned by Ruka that that truck was coming down the pike, and you'd have turned and you'd have stepped out of the way. But these dynamics are passed from generation to generation. People say, well, why do children sometimes have these horrible diseases? And it's really important to use this information for healing, because the false self will use it to play the game of rage and blame. Oh my God, I'm to blame for my children's diseases. No, you're only responsible for your own. And when you take responsibility for what's going on in you, you open the energy dynamic within yourself to free both you and your generations. Let's see, we've got, based on your work, how does conflict look for you and Jeanie? Touchy question. No, we're here. We're here doing our work. And when Jeanie and I first met, we had this instant connection. Actually, we talked on the phone and didn't meet for about 3 weeks. But after the first time we talked on the phone, neither of us ever looked at anybody ever again. We've had many layers to look through and to work with. Actually, if you go back to, well, we've been together 20 years. Actually, you could do two things. You could go back, and I don't even know if we've even got a copy on the website, Jeanie, of the original commitment. But way back 40 years ago, when I first started working in the arena of relationships, I had a workshop that was called Healing Your Relationships, because I thought there was such a thing as a diseased relationship. And then after a short period of time, I realized that no, there are no diseased relationship. Every relationship is perfect. Every relationship will reflect perfectly to each person involved in the relationship what it is they need to heal if they'll grow up and be adults and take responsibility. So one of the tools that I developed in the early work was a commitment. It was like, and this was, I was doing this for me, and I shared it in the workshop. And I realized that my personal code, something we get into in our laws of living class, my personal code demanded that when certain thing happened, I would go into upset, I would go into anger, I would go into sadness, I would go into fear. That was my personal code. And so I worked to develop the thing we call my commitment now. In the early days, that commitment was about, I don't know, maybe 15 short lines long. And then over the years, every time that I came across some form of hostility or fear that came up in me strongly enough to take me out of love, I would look at the commitment and say, what can I put in this to expand it? And over the years, it's developed into where now it's 3 pretty hefty paragraphs. If you were to look at the commitment from 20 years ago, if you were to look at the original commitment to the one we had 20 years ago when Jeanie and I met, you will see exactly what Jeanie and I have been through, because every time that a conflict came up, I would look at the commitment and go, so what am I going to do for me? What am I going to do to change my personal code to deal with this? And if you looked at the 20-year commitment, and Jeanie, maybe we need to get these commitments together, see what we've got of them historically, to just take a look. Because if you look at the development of the commitment from 40 years ago, you'll see everything that I've gone through personally in terms of my own inner work. And the commitment has changed in the last 2.5 or 3 years, there've been I think three major changes. And so it's about doing our work. Now, sometimes, we'll each go into our own corner, our hostility or fear is up, and, there's been times of separation in doing that. There's a point, Jeanie shares how in the early days of the codependence work, as she started to do it, she thought, because she had a lot of conflict with mom, that her power person was her mom. And then as we got deeper into the codependence work, she realized that what would happen when the stress was up and the chips are down is she'd leave or want to leave. It was actually a point where we sat down and had a conversation, and this thing of leaving was always there. And what she touched into was that when she was a kid, her conflicts with her mom, and she surmised that there was some of the same conflicts with dad. And what happened would be dad would leave and go to the farm, the family farm, about an hour and a half from here. Dad would leave and go to the farm, and she'd be left here with mom. And so she realized her real power person was dad, because when the stress was from the chips out, she wanted to leave. And there came a point where we sat down and had a conversation. It's like, we're in this relationship, we're committed. That's it, we're committed. So we need to take this leaving thing off the table. I would go into, one of my habits was when the stress was up and the chips are down, and my hurt feeling was withdrawal. And that really brought a lot of stuff up for Jeanie. And so we sat down, and one of our conversations was, okay, so either we're committed in this relationship or we're not. If we're committed, then this is the last conversation about leaving we're going to have. It's off the table. That just isn't an option. And so that's where thoughts about that too. And the question is, so once you discover a personal code, you don't destroy it, you replace it with a commitment. Well, basically you upgrade it. The commitment's an external thing. It's like, here's a set of guidelines. How am I going to integrate that? If let's say I have a power person dynamic. I was talking to someone the other day, and their partner, who says they want to heal, and this person really wants to heal, but their power person or their partner just screams and rages. Well, now what we know is that fellow had a power person who screamed and raged at him. So what are we going to do about it? You're going to do the work of cleaning it up. So you apply forgiveness. It isn't that you destroy or don't destroy it, or you don't actually replace it with a commitment, but between forgiveness, between collapsing into the experiences, the memories of the power person raging. The reason my best understanding of why a person turns to when they're ultra stressed, the power person behavior, is because in that ultra stress state, that means their mind's in overload, overwhelm, confusion, don't know what to do. And it's like you could almost imagine they're now going to take a long, deep look into their unconscious. And here's this person, 30, 40, 50, 60, whatever. They're going to look into their unconscious. I'm in confusion. I don't know what the heck to do. What did God do? I.e., my power person, usually a parent. What did they do to win over me in these situations? So now the advisor they have is the power person dynamic. And so if what they did to win over me when I was 3 was rage at me, then I take that advice, and now I'm doing the behavior that I hated it when my power person raged at me, but that's what I'll do. So it's a dual thing. It's not just integrating the commitment, but it's forgiving. It's going back directly, exposing those original experiences, the memories of them, to active present love. Bring them out of the unconscious to the conscious in the presence of love. You'll notice in the worksheet process in step 4, step 3, you've identified the goal. Step 4, you're bringing love present in your mind. And step 5, you're canceling the goal. When you cancel the goal, the construct based in pain drops into the root of the pain. You're now directly in the unconscious, and love is present, and it begins a dissolution of that. And now you're at choice. You bring in something new. Oh, okay. So now, if the stress is up and the chips are down, and I remember that old rage my power person did, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to remember how important you are to me. and how committed I am in my relationship with you, and that we are here for eternity. And I'm going to speak to you. I'm going to own, gee, there's still a part of me that wants to roar. Would you hold the space for me while I do this worksheet and I get through this painful experience? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to treat you lovingly, gently, and with respect in my thoughts, in my words, and in my actions. Now, I can remember when, that idea wasn't in the commitment. It was just, I'm going to treat you lovingly, gently, and with respect. And then I realized that, well, I say that, and in behavior here, I do that, but in my mind, am I doing something? Am I off in the other's face? Am I speaking behind someone's back about them in a way that's other than loving, gentle, and respectful? So that's where, for instance, that line was changed to in my thoughts, in my words, and in my actions. Need to integrate it in all three levels. So it's an integration process and a healing process of accessing the unconscious dynamic. Again, as Carl Jung says, until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct our lives. And we'll just say, well, that's just the way it is. Life, that's life. No, it's not. That's me. And so this is the cleanup program. So that's what we're here for. And Miss Jeanie, unfortunately, let's see. I'm trying to. Do you, Jeanie. Okay, Miss Jeanie, let's see if we got you here, sweetie. You're on. I can hear Jeanie talking in the other room, but she's not coming through, so my apologies. But we appreciate you, and it's 2:00, so thanks for coming to join us, and hope this has served you, and we're here to hold the space, and hope you have the best year yet of your eternal life. Blessings.